Welcome to Innovating with Scott Amyx. This is your host, Scott, and I'm joined by Fred Schonenberg, who is the founder of VentureFuel. Welcome, Fred.
Thanks so much, Scott. It's great to be here.
All right. So, important question and a very relevant question that we have to start with is, why is innovating so hard, especially for large corporations?
I think it's a number of factors. The biggest one is they were once very innovative. That's how they established market. And then once they had some sort of category fit, they had to grow quickly and efficiently. And so that's where all the attention goes, is on making it more and more efficient. How do they grow it? How do you squeeze the profit out of that? And you become more risk averse during that process. You start to hire different types of minds and people. And then it becomes a little bit more difficult to take chances, to encourage chances, have a culture of risk-taking and agile thinking. And it's why you see this process of, sort of disruption and new companies coming in. And there are companies that do a good job of this. And it's certainly been a trend the past, let's say 10 years of corporations recognizing that they need to innovate, they need to come up with new products and new ways of doing business. And there's been a lot of testing in what that formula is. Is it incubators? Is it accelerators? Is it corporate VCs? Is it partnerships? And so I think it's different for each type of business. But the biggest barrier is, if you're operating a large established company, your job is to deliver profit to Wall Street and predictable profit. And you want to take risk out of that equation. And that is not how innovation works. So that's the friction point.
Well, I have to say I've listened to many different definitions of the not just what innovation is, but the challenges that's inherent to large organizations when it comes to innovation. And I have to say, I think you've done a really nice job of concisely articulating the fundamental challenge with it. In terms of some of the formula that you're referring to, some believe that, again, regardless of the sector, that they think that having a little bit of play in everything, meaning they have their own accelerator, they have their own corporate VC, then of course they have their own innovation methodology in-house, but also looking to venture studios and also working with startups, also working with VCs. What is the right formula, if in fact there is a formula?
I think it's probably a little different for everyone. And there are moments where you look and you go, wow, they've got eight to 10 different groups trying all the different methods that you mentioned. And I don't think that's necessarily bad, as long as they approach it the way a VC would. You make lots of small bets, and the ones that start to resonate and work for your organization, you hyper fund those. And so that can be, I think there's a lot of data out there on corporate VC being a little bit challenging, acquisitions in particular, not necessarily giving great long-term returns. But I think corporate VC is interesting, and that's going to take a little bit more time to play out. But the partnership game, it's the one where we spend a lot of time, that and accelerators and incubators. I think what's interesting about that is the overhead. The capital expenditure isn't quite as daunting. So you can make multiple bets on this and see what works for your organization. I think a real tough thing is you have these different innovation groups. How do they plug into the core business? Are they the stepchild that's out there innovating wild and crazy, and then when it goes to scale, they don't even know anybody in the company to make things happen? That happens frequently. So you need some involvement from the C-suite or senior leadership at the very least to connect these different worlds. But I don't know if there's one right type of program, but I think that it's important to fund those that are working for you and focus on those.
Yep. Well, I remember vividly having a conversation with executive director of an innovation lab for a very well-established, known brand, and they happen to have a innovation lab based in Silicon Valley. And she was sharing in confidence how challenging it was for her to interface with the corporate parents. Because no matter how well she did her job of vetting out, doing the due diligence, looking for those opportunities and bringing them to the corporate, oftentimes, she was faced with the fact that many of the executive stakeholders didn't fundamentally understand the business models or the technologies or the domain of these startups that she was trying to bring on board, nor was there even political momentum or support to really uh, bring that into the core, like you said, to become a part of the product portfolio, even if in fact there was an explicit statement and commitment from the C-suite that they were supporting this innovation arm.
There's a fantastic Harvard Business Review article that it was basically like, what does the word innovation mean to you? What is your like visceral reaction to it? And you had the C-suite and the innovation community thinks of it as disruption and creating new revenue streams and all these very positive accolades. And then when they ask the same question to people that are in the core business, waste of time, no scale, distraction from our core business. It's we're fortunate that we work with different groups within some of these large corporations, and the innovation team sometimes is looked at as the crazy people that they're trying anything and like it doesn't move the needle. Direct quote once given to me by somebody is, "It doesn't sell 1,000,000 cases of mayonnaise, I'm not interested." And that's because that's the P&L that person, his KPIs, his bonuses, everything is tied not to trying new things, but delivering on a predictive scale. So I think there's friction internally on what innovation is. And you mentioned one of my pet peeves, which is the corporate outpost in Silicon Valley, where they throw one person, they get them a desk somewhere, and it's like we're innovating now, and it's not the only place that startups happen, and that's not going to solve your problems.
Yeah. So how is VentureFuel uniquely trying to solve this problem?
We come at this from an angle that I don't know of anyone else that does, which is we think of this corporate first, innovation from a corporate focused lens. So a VC has a thesis, and that is where they put all their money, and they invest in all these different products. And then if a corporate calls that VC is going to pitch them whatever they put their money into already. They're going to try and fit the square into whatever hole is being offered. We come at this from the other lens. Our thesis is whatever the business challenge or problem is of the corporation. So if they're trying to digitize their HR practice, we're going to go out and look for the best startup or new technology specifically for that problem that fits into their organization. We're not looking for a startup that's going to bring us a 300x return, because our business model is to solve the needs of the corporation. So I think by looking at startups from a lens of, is it going to solve a problem? And that can be a short-term or near or longer-term problem. It doesn't have to be an immediate pilot. That gives us a really interesting focus with which to view startups and also de-risk innovation, because we're not trying to find the startup that's going to go public to carry the rest of our investment, carry the whole fund. We're actually just trying to solve whatever the corporate challenge is.
Now, some corporate entities are already doing this to an extent, and others are capable to do this on their own. Why do they need to work with VentureFuel type of an organization?
I think one of the great advantages we have is because we work with so many different types of corporation, blue chip, Fortune 500s all around the world. We get exposed to a deal flow that is really unique. If you are an insurance company that has an innovation team, you are mostly looking at insurance startups and insurance tech, which is what you should be spending your time on. But really breakthrough innovations don't come in the funnel that you're focused on, right? It's an adjacent category, or it's a startup that maybe is working in the travel industry, but if you tweak one or two things, it solves the problem that you have. So we're able to have this really wide scope or view, a lens, if you will, and really diversified deal flow of what we see, which allows us to come up with creative solutions that a lot of sort of siloed organizations have a hard time with. So it's extra eyeballs at like a very like basic level, but I think there's also a lot of strategic and creative thinking that we can lend, that will help give them maybe a different perspective.
Yeah, actually, that strategic lens is actually super important. There's a article that I wrote on Forbes specifically talking about empirical research that shows that some of the most profound innovations rarely ever come from the domain that you are in, but rather the further you go away from your domain to distant domains and tap into that, you start to find different models and different inspirations, and then you bring that back into your domain. From those different inspirations, you start to really get outside of the box and create those profound, novel solutions that are also very practical as well.
We
Um,
always require our clients to allow us a wild card.
hmm.
No matter what their brief is to us, we say, okay, we're gonna give you 5 solutions, but one of them, it's not going to make sense on first look, because we find that if we're just following exactly what they ask for, they're going to get exactly what they were looking for, which isn't going to be innovative. So we try and find something that's coming at this from a different lens or a different angle to, at the very least, spark creative thought that can inform the next project. But we're always trying to get folks to look at things slightly differently and maybe find a solution that they weren't sure of, or cognizant of was in the ecosystem.
Yeah, I really find that approach very interesting, and it almost has an agency-like feel in terms of the creative, out-of-the-box thinking approach. Now, one of the things that's a concern for, of course, many startups, especially the B2B types of plays, is that if they expose their technologies, maybe in a context of pilot or something else, that there is this risk that the larger entity could potentially take some of their IP or just outright, use it without their permission or payment. How do you address that?
My first reaction is you should always protect what you have. And especially, it depends a little bit on the business and how important the IP is. Founders tend to overvalue their IP, in my opinion. In a lot of cases, it's not quite as unique as they believe it to be. For the most part, I find that corporations act with integrity and laziness. And I don't know which is powering it, but they would rather work with you to do what you do best than try and figure out how to build that themselves, how to, they're going to go through all the learning curves you've already been through. So they're trying to hack their way to a solution. So for the most part, I think that the corporations are going to act with integrity and are going to see you as a resource rather than kind of trying to drain your brain to then go out and steal something. That all said, with a giant caveat, if you have some sort of breakthrough tech that is nowhere else in the world, that a bigger player could take it and run with it, and you'd be out of the water. You have to protect that like crazy, and lawyers are good at that. We've been doing this for 6 years and done hundreds of pilots and partnerships, and it has not been an issue at any step along the way. But certainly, depending on how proprietary it is, you'd want to protect it.
Now, having had the opportunity to speak with you before this podcast, I know that your distribution in terms of your source of deal flow is very broad because you pretty much are able to access most, if not many other VCs that are out there, as well as other investor groups. How do you systematically curate from the potential thousands, hundreds of startups down to that, short list of 5 or less that you then present to your corporate clients?
Yeah, it's a challenge. Our first sort of filter is, people talk about the wisdom of the crowd. We are fortunate that we are connected to a really, really impressive crowd. Our crowd is 500 plus VCs, accelerators, incubators all around the world. So they're doing a level of filtering for us. We'll reach out to them and say, we're working on a project and here's the brief and the deliverables. And are there any companies they've invested in or looked at that are interesting? So we get a really, really interesting group of, let's say, 1,000 companies back. At that point, we really grind through it. We look for, we know our clients well, we know what's not going to work with their tech stack or with their personalities or their organization. So there's a lot that you can kind of knock off the top. And then when we get down to, let's say, 25, that's where we really start doing a lot of due diligence. We try and talk to as many founders as we can. Our belief is if the company is interesting, it may not work for this client or this deal, but it may work for the next client, the next deal. And at the very least, it's good for us to know about them and understand what they're doing, because it makes us smarter. We're very careful not to spin founders' wheels. I know what it's like to be a founder and have only so much time. So we don't just do calls to do them. There has to be a project that's of interest and it has to be real. But oftentimes I find when we talk to the founder, we learn a lot. We've got all sorts of databases. We've got a lot of different filters that we look at. We look at the founding team. We look at money raised to date, their investors. We do look at corporate history, meaning have they worked with other corporations and what was the success like there? Are those corporations repeating? Are they scaling with them? Was there solid metrics that came out of it that can kind of de-risk this partnership? But really the last piece of it is really talking to the founders. And then, my team's entire background is on the corporate side. So we don't look at this from a VC lens. We look at it, is this partnership going to work? And so that gives us a different filter that you can't get from a platform or an investment group.
Yep. Let's see, we only have 30 seconds left. The question we always ask is, can you share with us a product or project failure from the past and the lessons learned that you can share with others?
Yeah, my original business model was we represented startups. It was almost like a sales rep firm, business development. It went very well. We launched a lot of really interesting startups. But the challenge was those startups need to have their own sales team. We could make early introductions, but I think learning that the corporations were the ones that really needed our help. The startups needed access at the right times, and then they could run. So we're essentially doing the exact same job. We're just working for the corporations now, and that's been a huge learning. But it took 3 years of the other way before that evolved. So that was, I guess I would say, a failure that has informed our success.
Well, terrific. So on that note, we've been joined by Fred Schonenberg, who is the founder of VentureFuel. Thanks for joining today.
Scott, thanks so much. It was a pleasure.